welcome to the Making of the Pixel Paper podcast, a series where we get to know the creative processes behind all types of digital artists. In June of this year, I released the first episode of my weekly podcast, which at the moment has been live for over 17 episodes, and there are even more in the works. And today I wanted to share my experiences on this podcast, generally for your interest, to see how a podcast is made, and also just some interesting behind the scenes, as well as things that I have learned. I'm going to adapt this framework, which I found in James Clear's email 321, because I think the steps if I move the steps around a bit, summarize this journey pretty well. So this is the 5-step process on how to build a podcast. For the last couple of years, I've been doing digital art, especially since I got an iPad. And I thought that this was the best medium for me as it was convenient and we were moving a lot at the time. It just offered a wide range of possibilities that one singular medium couldn't, so I was really interested in it. Anyway, whilst I was somewhat improving, I wasn't really getting near the quality that I was seeing on Instagram, and every time I'd scroll through my feed, I'd be really annoyed as to why I couldn't make artwork like that. I even thought of messaging people to see if they could give me advice, and this was around April of 2021. I was listening to an episode of the Future podcast, which I highly recommend, by the way. I can't remember the exact episode, which is a shame. But anyway, the guest mentioned that we should have our own audience, or we should make our own audience. And somehow or the other, I can't really remember, I kind of put two and two together and thought it would be really cool if I could make a podcast interviewing these artists whom I really admire, so that I get the knowledge, but also I get to share that knowledge with other people. So that's how I got the idea, and I remember I put out an Instagram story to gauge engagement, but despite whether the engagement did well or not, I ultimately knew I was going to do it regardless of the response, because it was just one of those ideas that I just had to do it no matter what, and I'm so glad I have. So now, going back to step 1, cold emailing people 2 steps ahead of me. I actually had to reach out to guests, obviously, to interview them, so I needed to draft emails and figure out what questions I would be asking them. In the beginning, I made it very specific. Digital artists under 10,000 followers who I had already followed for a while and admired their work, so it would be easier for me to make the questions because I was already familiar with their work. After a while, once it started to get a bit more traction and I had more confidence, I started reaching out to artists who are over 10k but under 50k, and particularly artists who don't really have many interviews online. Even if they do, I always try and make sure that, the questions that I'm asking are different to what they've already been asked before. I try and find artists who are doing something different as well, in order to bring some variety to the guests and the interviews. Generally, I find these artists by either Instagram suggestions or through websites like Behance, where I found a lot of really good people just scrolling in my downtime at work. All right, moving on to step 2, talking about their work and trading ideas. I conduct the calls over Zoom, just a voice call, which is actually really interesting because I feel like you get a different dimension of a person when you're just hearing their voice, because you're not judging them based on their external appearance, and I think you can connect on a deeper level. We basically have a conversation and I try my best to make the guest comfortable. And a lot of people actually come with scripts, a lot more than people realize, which makes it easier for them because most, I would say 80% of the artists are nervous. It's completely normal, by the way. I feel like everyone thinks, oh, I'm the only one who's nervous. Trust me, you're not. All right, step 3, doing great work. I remember the first couple of months before I released the podcast, it was really hectic because I totally tried to overdo what I wanted, and at the same time I was trying to figure out how to make a podcast. I had just finished a course in After Effects, also by The Future. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of The Future. I really wanted to put these skills to use by making an animated trailer, which I did, and I also made some animated posts so I could promote the podcast before it actually released on Instagram. I edit in Adobe Audition, which is where you can edit audio and just make it sound a bit better, like removing kind of background noise or any sharp noise or silences, things like that. And then I edit the final thing in Premiere Pro because I also make a YouTube version, so I need the visual aspect. After, I would say, the first 10 episodes, I've gotten into a rhythm where I now have templates that work completely well, and, you know, I just reuse things, which makes it easier for me. The hardest part is always the beginning, so if you are there, if you're starting something, just trust me, just push through, because it's a really steep climb at the top. It's a really steep climb in the beginning, but after that, it just becomes smooth sailing. The fourth step is to share it publicly. So I use Later to schedule the Instagram posts that I make, and Anchor is what I use to upload the podcast to all podcast platforms. Anchor is actually made by Spotify and it's free to use, which is amazing. And of course, I upload to the Pixel Paper Podcast YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. I have a database of people, which I keep in Notion, and I adapted the video tracker template by Thomas Frank in order to make this. I personally love both Notion and Thomas's template for not just my podcast, but also to make these YouTube videos that I highly recommend you check them both out because it's all completely free. I mean, how amazing is that? Notion is genuinely the best app I've used like ever. And one day I hope they'll sponsor me because I swear I will sponsor the heck out of them. I also upload blog versions to upload to Medium, which is a blogging platform, and Substack, which allows you to get the podcast straight into your inbox. If you're interested, the links are both below in the description. And finally, step number 5, become friends and rise together. This is definitely the biggest perk of doing this podcast, and also the reason that I wanted to create it, because I really wanted to foster a community of artists who can learn from each other. It made me a lot more reflective and kind of take my art a bit more slower after I've interviewed these artists, because a lot of artists have emphasized how important it is to keep learning and to keep, improving your craft, and also conversely how unimportant social media is in the bigger picture, because, whilst social media is simply good for sharing and connecting, it shouldn't be a measure of your worth. And hearing so many people say that, it's really helped me to personally disconnect from Instagram and just focus more on my own work. There are a lot of things that I've learned from the artists themselves, but I'm going to save that for a part 2 of this video. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this slightly new style of video. I was trying to experiment a bit. If you're interested, you can check out the podcast below. There is a whole host of digital artists for you to listen to from literally all over the globe, from Brazil to South Korea and everywhere in between. All right, I will see you next week for another video. Bye.